last time you saw me was at Mint, but maybe the last time you saw me before that, I was probably what 11, 10 years old. So now I'm 14.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, I don't know, that's what's funny because I know when you broke onto the scene, like, I watched and dude, like, I think what was it, the full send at Glamis over the canal? Was that the first kind of
Yeah, so this is actually one of the shirts of my original car. This was the car. It was a naturally aspirated Polaris Razor four-seater.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and it was like, "Holy crap," and I looked at it, I'm like, "Dude, it was like butter smooth, that jump," and I'm like, "Dude," like, my daughter's 14, and I'm like, she sends it, but I'm like, "There's no way she could do it that butter smooth, man."
So I mean, it was the only reason why it was that smooth. It was because it was close. So it was
Yeah,
like maybe I would say maybe about 10 inches from the actual downslope. So I
yeah.
hit like right on top of it.
That's the thing is though, I get what you're saying. You were like literally 1 mile an hour, 2 mile an hour slower, it would have been bad news.
Oh
But
yeah,
it's like,
for sure.
but sometimes those are the best. Like you made it look like full pro because it was
Oh
so
yeah.
better. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, we'll just ignore the fact that half a mile an hour the other direction and it would have been bad.
No, for sure. That's one of the things I loved about the NA cars is it was basically full speed over everything. Now with the turbo cars, I got to use my best judgment and I got to dictate on how much throttle I'm supposed to use. With the NA car, it was just like full speed wherever I could go. So that was fun.
It is funny you bring that up because I've done like when I first started Terracross, so we're talking way back. We had
Mhm.
these crazy gap jumps, stuff like that, and it was big enough jumps where you started having to work the throttle and the brakes in the air to make sure the cars, you know what I mean,
Right.
almost like you do on a dirt bike. But dude, the NA cars are so much easier to jump than the turbo cars. So turbo cars are always worrying about boost and things like that. Like the NA cars felt like I had way more control over it than I do the turbo cars.
For sure, because so I've owned NA RS1 and I have a RS1 with a turbo motor in it. So it doesn't make big horsepower, but it's stupid light. So with my RS1, it was a short course RS1. Dude, I just send that full speed over everything, and I would always clear things perfect. We were in Texas at I forgot what that place is called, but it's a massive 100-foot triple. And I wasn't scared to hit it in my NA car because I would come down at full speed and hit it and it would clear it perfect. Now I'm scared to hit it in the turbo car because now I got to worry about how much throttle I'm supposed to use, or if I use too much throttle, I'm going to overshoot it. So that was one of the cool things about the NA cars.
Yeah, what's funny because like I was in all the turbo cars for the longest time. Now going back to Cowie's is back to an NA platform. So it's like I feel
Yeah,
it's awesome to drive those. And now like I'm the crazy guy that went through a supercharger on a Cowie. So now it's like something completely different I'm dealing with, on this new play car that we haven't really launched yet. But it's funny, like I spend a lot of time up at Dirtfish. I know you ping me and you want to get up there and go
oh
and
yeah.
have some fun. One of the cool things about that is like all those cars are turboed. So like a lot of their training, when you get into the advanced training, it's about keeping the boost up in the corners, and
Right.
like getting on the throttle just enough that it keeps the boost up so you can slingshot yourself out of the corners. And it's like people don't realize with turbos, they just think, oh, turbo power. And I'm like, but when you get to do
uh,
stuff that you're doing and what I'm doing, it's like, man, sometimes that power is great, but you got to learn to work with it.
yeah, for sure. Because I actually have a rally car. It's not the best rally car, but it's a 2006 Porsche Cayenne. It's a twin turbo V8. So it's lifted. It's got some 33s on it. It's got a little bit of a long travel kit. And when I drove just a regular small little Subaru with no turbo, it was so much easier to drive than a car with a turbo because then there was so much boost that if you stepped on it even a little bit and then you started to go in it, you can feel how much that kicked back. So you had to learn to play with it or you were going to spin out. So that was one of the things I learned about a turbo. It's kind of hard.
Yeah, I know. Like, what was it? Josh Daniel a few years back when he had his like twin turbo trophy truck, and it was like 1,200 horsepower. And I'm like, man, I don't know. Like, and I've never talked to him about it, but that had to been a beast to drive just with that working with the turbos and stuff. I'm so used to a trophy truck just having that pure V8 horsepower. It's
Yeah,
like that'd have been
exactly.
interesting driving in the desert with turbos like that. But
So
I don't know.
like even so I have that turbo RS1 and it's got some juice. So it makes like 215 wheel horsepower,
Yeah.
which is a lot for a car that's only made to have 80 wheel horsepower.
Well, if it's at the
So
wheels, yeah, dude, that's legit. A lot of people use crank numbers. If you're at the wheels at that, that's rowdy.
right, yeah, I'm about 215 to the wheels, and if I have a good tire setup, it'll pop wheelies. So that's one of the things. If I'm coming around a corner in the RS1, it'll have enough power to throw it backwards. So that's one of the scariest things about driving that car. That's why it's only made for the straight shoot and hitting a jump.
Yeah.
So we have sometimes that takeover events. If I need more speed to come into a corner, I gotta launch out of a corner into the jump. So there's times where I'd come out and my tires will start lifting up. It's so sketchy. It's super sketchy having the turbo in that car.
Yeah, I almost feel like, did you ever, I know we're both buddies with James at IMG. Did you ever
Oh
see
yeah.
that drift razor he had the one time with the handbrake and that? I almost feel like
So
your turbo RS1, you almost need to drop that down on slicks and just go and drift that thing.
so I do have a car I call my drift car. It's got a big old backstory, but it's the original car I jumped the canal with. So I put a supercharger on it, and it just wasn't enough horsepower. And I had to work with it a lot because I used it for jumping. It was my original jump car. So
Yeah.
then I bring it home, and it sat for like a year. I bought a new car, and then my friends are like, "Come on, let's just build it. We'll pull the motor out. We'll put a turbo motor in it, and call it good." So it was a big project. Put a turbo motor in it. Put a bunch of new stuff in it, dropped it to the floor, got an indecent handbrake in it, put some 26-inch tires on it, turned it into a razor drift car. So it makes about 200 wheel horsepower as well. And I slide that thing everywhere. You pull the handbrake, you get it slid. It's literally like a drift car. Did a 4-wheel drive delete in it. There's just a bunch of good stuff on it.
That's awesome. And I think you wrench on most all your own stuff, right? You're out in the garage just wrenching away.
So pretty much. So right now, I started about a year ago when this is one of the things my dad tried to teach me my whole life is when I was 9, 10, 11, I just never wanted to be down in the shop, period. Like, I just expected that he would work on my cars for me, and it was just like an arrive and drive type system
Yeah.
until my dad, because he had to commute to work every day, come home at 6, then work on my cars. Until my dad hurt himself at work, so now he's on workers' comp. He was like, "You're on your own. Like, if you want to race, you're gonna have to fix it yourself." And I'm 12 years old, and I'm like, and I have at 12, I had five cars that I used all the time. So then I'm sitting here like, well, I don't know how to work on these things. And then it was kind of just like um, a learning stage for me that I actually had to work on my own stuff. So then from there on out, from 12 to 14, I've been working on all my own stuff, all 5 cars.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, obviously your dad, he's wicked smart. So there's things he can do to,
Super, yeah.
if you've got a problem, he can kind of help you troubleshoot things like that. Right.
Right. I come to him. I'm like, Dad, what do I do? This thing's not coming off, or how do I get this off, or how do I put it back on? Because it's easier to take things off than it is to put them back on. Because then I'm like, wait, which bolt does this go in, and where does this line go to? So then I'm going to my dad. I'm taking pictures. I run back up because my shop is at my house, which is super cool. So it's down the street right here. So I'm running back home, like, hey, Dad, I got this picture. Can you show me how to do this? And it's a learning stage, but yeah, he can help me with all that stuff because he's been doing it for so long.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing that's cool about your program. We'll get into talking about the racing and stuff like that, but it's like, from day one, like your family's been involved. I know, I've seen, met your sister before.
Yeah,
Obviously, your dad's at all the events, things like that. You're always posting funny stuff with the family. Like, I think that's one
yeah.
thing that's rad is your family. You know what I mean? It's not like just you or just you and your dad. It's like the whole family's involved.
So yeah, so like a year ago at Mint 400, I had my cousin, my aunt, my grandma, my grandpa, mom, dad, sister, and a couple of my other cousins there helping me being my pit crew, help with the radios, help with all that. And I had a good buddy Dylan from Dirt Life, and he was like, "Dude, your family's just your pit crew. You don't have anybody else there." I'm like, "No, it's pretty much just them." And he was like, "Dude, it's so family oriented, which is cool because I'm able to communicate with them a lot better." Especially because my mom and dad are deaf. So it's easier to communicate with all of them together since they all know sign. It's just way easier that way because if I have another pit crew come with my family, they don't really know how to tell them things. So if I have my family there, we're all able to communicate with each other, which is super cool.
Yeah. Well, and see, I didn't know your mom was deaf too. So your mom and dad
Yeah,
are deaf.
my both mom and dad are deaf.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. I met your dad a bunch of times. I never met your mom, so I didn't know that. So
Yeah,
that's actually
yeah,
kind of rad.
both of
'Cause I know
mine.
I've seen you and your sister you guys are so quick on the sign, and it's funny because like your family's got like its own language, and I mean that in the best possible way. But you guys like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the way you communicate is awesome to watch from the side.
It's cool. So like we get types of looks all the time, curious looks, not bad looks. But
Yeah,
like if we're sitting in a restaurant, our family will look over and there's like 2 or 3 families watching us. Like, what are they doing? Or I would get it in school growing up. Like if my family's trying to talk to me and I'm signing to them, they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Talking." He was like, "With your hands?" Like, we used to get that a lot, but it's pretty cool. The curiosity is super cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're homeschooled now, right?
Yeah, so I went back to high school for 6 months, because my I've been homeschooled since I was 4th grade, and my parents were like, "Well, we do want you to have some type of high school experience."
Yeah.
So I went for 6 months, and in the time period being there, that our school had already like, "Hey, you gotta go back to homeschool or you have to file an agreement that you have to stay here." Because I had already missed 17 days of school in 3 months. So I'd already missed so much school because I had to do racing and I had to do a bunch of other stuff. So I was always just leaving school. So I ended up going back to homeschool, and homeschool is just much easier for me because I do homework, get finished by 1, go down to the shop, eat dinner, and then that's basically it overlaps. Because if I get home from school, I take the bus, and I'd get home about 4:30, and then it would basically be done. So the homeschool is definitely way better, and it works better for me.
Yeah, I know like Mia Chapman, when she graduated 8th grade, she went to full homeschool through high school. Same thing. Like she was racing all the time, gone. Like she had sponsored, things and she'd have to be here, be there. So it's just easier to homeschool and she could do it on the road and stuff like that. And it worked out really, really well for her. So seems like, you're the kind of the same way. And she even said, she goes, I think I learned more through homeschool than I actually would have if I was in real school.
It is because since I got home at 4:30, I was down at the shop for until 8, and then I would come up, eat late dinner, and then go to bed, and I'd always wake up so tired, and then I would go to school and not learn anything. So then if I have my own timeline to do what kind of homework I want, it's just much easier for me that way because then I wake up at 8 or 7:30, have breakfast, then do my homework, and then it just makes it so much easier for me and I have much more time to do it. So the homeschool is definitely better and I learn a lot more there than I would in regular school.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think, "Oh, homeschool be great. You just sleep in till noon, and you don't." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, it doesn't work that way. You
No,
can still
it's
get behind if you start screwing off."
exactly, yeah, so, like, people will tell me, like, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to do homeschool," and because we at homeschool, it's not like an assignment is due every single day, it's more of, like, every 2 months, then they check on you and make sure that you have everything ready,
Yeah,
so then people are like, "Oh, yeah, so you could just wait till the last week to do everything," I'm like, no, it's not that easy." So, no, it's still school, like, you still have to do the school, but it's just easier to do it because you have your own timeline.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, obviously, you kind of broke onto the scene, after that big jump in Glamis, stuff like that. But I mean, you've been really active in, getting sponsorship and getting some support and stuff like that for your program. How'd that all start coming into happening?
So I people always take it as like, "Oh, I just jumped the canal and now I'm
Yeah.
just a racer just because of that, or I have sponsors just because of that." I started racing when I was 8 and a half. Um, my dad had been working full time at SpaceX, and he came to me when I was about 6 years old because we were always going to Glamis.
Yeah.
And he came to me, "Hey, do you want to race?" And I was like, "Nah, not really." And he's like, "Okay." So he bought me a quad because that was the only thing that I would like. He bought me a quad. I used it. Then we went to Sandsport Super Show, and they had that little, or yeah, Sandsport Super Show. They had those like little demos or people that, and there was this kid named Chance Haugen. He was 14 years old,
I know the
driving,
Hougans. Yeah.
yeah, driving a turbo car, and I was like, holy. And my dad and I looked at him, my dad, and I was like, yeah, I want to race. That's pretty cool. And that's kind of where it started. Then their whole team took me on, and my dad ended up buying me a Razor 570 that I raced in Lucas Oil, which I didn't really get the feeling for just because it was always the same thing. So then we went to like dirt series and works and all that good stuff. And that's kind of started where I gaining my sponsorships was meeting up at people warts or making great content. And my first couple of sponsors came in when there was this kind of big double at the Dirt Series at Glen Helen. So it had kind of this big launch, and it was almost like a step up like this, and it was almost like a roll down. And I was like the first 570 to fully launch it over. And then one of our reposters or something like that reposted it, and it ended up getting some pretty good views. And that's kind of where it started was that whole gaining sponsorship from there. So I had maybe about 800 followers on Instagram. That's when it started to pick up from there. And then once the Hoonigans, this is where my all my big started. The Hoonigans had noticed it, and they were like, "Hey, just saw your pretty cool jumps. Do you want to come to the Hoonigan Burn Yard and just do some stuff with your 570. You know, we got some ramps, and I was like super stoked, and that was where it all started. With our whole social media deal was just from there was the Hoonigans taking me on. So then just from that day is where I started to pick up all my sponsorships.
Yeah, that's awesome. Who Hoonigan at that time? Like I'm friends with some of the OGs, like Scotto and I mean
Oh
Big
yeah.
Hurt and stuff like that. So yeah, so those guys were all the ones who reached out to you. You went and were you at the new burn yard or were you like OG? Because they've had a couple different burn yards.
Oh yeah, I was the OG burn yard. Like it maybe had like 20, 30 feet to work
Yeah,
with. Yeah, so like 2 weeks before that, my dad's like, okay, we gotta teach you how to do donuts, we gotta teach you how to do all this. And this is in like what, a 20 horsepower wheel side by side? Like this is not something you should be doing donuts in, you know what I mean? So then I started learning how to do concrete donuts in it. And it was hard because it would barely spin the tires, so it's like hopping from the back. And then I show up there and they're like, holy crap, because I'm doing donuts in this tiny space and a little Razor 570, bare concrete, no water. So that's
yeah,
kind of where it all started, and that's kind of where my drifting ability came in.
that's awesome. And so I know the big switch for you was when you started the desert program, right?
So yeah, because I raced short course in my 570 for 2 years, 2.5 years. And then my dad gave me his Razor XP4 1000, which is the car I jumped the canal in. So he
Yeah,
gave it to me because he wanted me to start racing desert in it. We were going to turn it into a pro UTV, a pro NA car. So that is when I started building my RS1 short course car to get into short course. And then one of our good buddies came to us like, "Hey, Parker 250s coming up. They got like the short mile race where it's only 2 laps instead of three, so you can only do 180 miles." And so we were like, "Yeah, okay, fine, we'll race it." So then we built kind of a desert RS1. We made like a rear tire rack for it, put long travel suspension on it, and I raced the Parker 250. And then from there, I raced. I Ironman the Mint 400 at 11 years old. I was the only driver in my RS1. So that's when the desert scene started to pick up from there.
yeah, and you had to. I mean, at that point in time, you probably had to get like your parents to sign off because I think like certainly there's like an age
So,
requirement, right?
so I was, besides Max Gordon, I was the first kid to break the barrier to start racing by myself. So I was the first one to do it at 11 years old. So when I showed up to Parker, I kind of gave him a couple examples, like, oh, I'm a professional driver. So then it was kind of a one-time deal. Like if there was some trouble, you wouldn't be able to race until you're 15 or whatever.
Yeah,
So like, okay, then I ended up finishing with two broken rear axles. The car was totally messed up. And then from there, I was able to race. I got a waiver for the Mint 400, and then I got a waiver to race in San Felipe. So I got a bunch of waivers, and then now a bunch of kids are able to race.
that's awesome. Breaking barrier, man.
Pretty much, yeah. I was stoked about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us about I know like I mean the desert stuff now you've steamrolled into I mean you've got a proper desert car. I know that was a big deal when you guys were having that thing built too, right? I think
Yeah. So I got my
is this still your first desert car? Or did you have a second one built?
So I had the RS1, which is a desert car because it had like it was tricked out. It got a big skid plate on it. It had a tire rack. It had a bunch of stuff. So we called it a desert car. So that was my first desert car. My Pro XP, it's a Pro XP four-seater. So a bunch of people. I was the first Pro UTV Pro XP that was doing it because I know a couple people took turbo cars and put Pro XP faces on it.
Mhm.
So mine's the first Pro XP Pro UTV that was out, and we released it in 2021, but it was supposed to be ready late 2020. So I had it ready for Vegas Torino, and me and Alexia Leeming ended up splitting half of the race for Vegas Torino. But yeah, it's a proper built race car. It's made for desert, and it's got the wheelbase to go over whoops, but it's also short enough to be able to make corners. So it's definitely a proper built race car.
Yeah. So going back to some of the jumps and stuff like that, I love following you on social media. It's one of my favorite follows because I have no idea what you're gonna do. I know like just before we went on, you started recording this, you're doing like burnouts in your UTV. You
Yeah,
threw that up on Instagram, but I mean, take us through some of your stunts because you've done stuff like I mean, obviously there's the canal jump. What was it at San Hollow? You jumped off the ledge. Like you
yeah.
go and do some gnarly stuff that I mean, a lot of people. I mean, we've seen some yard sales at some of this stuff.
Right. So that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about when you say yard sales. It's I've had a couple crashes in my career because obviously nothing goes according to plan.
No, not
Um,
always.
like for like so I did the canal 2 times. One time in my XP 1000 and the second time in my Razor Turbo S. Um, so obviously I was kind of scared to do it the second time because I'm like, because now I have to dictate how much throttle I'm supposed to use and all that. And my only instinct was better go come up in flat land than come up short. So I came pinned in my XP 1000 2 years before that, and I was pinned all the way in my Turbo S. It didn't let off a single time.
Oh,
And so this car has double the horsepower, so I went double the length. So I went about 180 feet the second time I did it, and about 100 feet the first time I did it. So when I did 180 feet, I didn't flat land, but since the ramp was so, how do I say it, such at a slope, I landed halfway down the ramp, but since I was so high off the ground, I was maybe 25 feet in the air, where I was supposed to land. So I basically flat landed onto the downslope. So what it did was it buckled my arms, broke my steering rack in half, and tumbled the car, and it pushed the tire into the frame, bent the frame up, bent the rear frame, tumbled the car a couple times. And the scary thing about that was my seat bracket had broke because it was a stock car
yeah.
with a roll cage. So when I had got there, they saw me kind of like my seat kind of hanging, and I unbuckled, got myself out of the car, and it's still, this is one of the scariest stunts I've ever done because when I came out, I bit in my lip right here on the top of my lip. I bit in it. So when I come out, it looked like I had blood on my cheek and stuff like that. And my dad's super scared because he's witnessing this happen. And that was my scariest stunt ever. It definitely holds a grudge, but it's almost like a mental block. Like I remember that happening, but then you kind of just have to like get over it and do it, which is pretty much my how do I say it? It's almost like Steve-O, how he has that like 3, 2, 1, go type of deal
Yeah.
before he does the stunt. It's almost like the same thing with me. So that's like one of my biggest stunts was the canal. I got some crazy ones coming up. Not the canal, but some other crazy stuff coming up. But yeah, I'm always doing stunts on the daily, and people take it like as I'm doing it for the Instagram or all that good stuff. But like, there's just times where we're hucking it in Glamis and somebody gets a shot and I post it, and then people are like, "Oh, you're just doing it for the fame or whatever." But it's literally just a fun thing we like to do. Like I like doing donuts, I like drifting and all that good stuff. So yeah, I got a couple stunts. I actually wanted to talk about my first ever stunt, and it was, I think I was 9.5, 10, and it was a big thought process because we had to build a metal ramp for it, and I would jump it in my Razor 570. So we measured a little bit, and it was 10 foot long and 5 foot high. It was a stupid ramp, but it was super, like it had a
I
lip.
was
It was
gonna
almost like a
say
drift.
that had to been like an abusive angle.
Yeah, it was. So it bucked the car super hard, which is why I call it my first stunt. But I put my mom's Jeep under it, and it was maybe about a 20-foot jump in my Razor 570. So I came at it at full speed, and it bucked the car so high I nosedived into the ground and front flipped a couple times. And that was my first ever stunt. So I've kind of just been an adrenaline junkie ever since. Was kind of how my first stunt started, and then it led up from there.
That's gnarly. That's gnarly. Well,
Yeah,
I say that as I've crashed plenty of cars myself. So it's been, knock
right.
on wood, a while since I've crashed something. So hopefully we keep with that. But I'm definitely not. I'm too old to crash like you have. So it's like my body hurts a whole lot more when I crash now.
Yeah, probably. I would assume so.
Yeah, definitely. I'm aging myself, but obviously, what's next for you? I know you'd said something. You got Dune Fest, UTV takeovers coming up over the summer.
Yeah, so I got the UTV takeover in June. I set the record in Oregon last year. I set the record in Oklahoma 2 years before that. I placed second last year. But yeah, I'm definitely hoping to set a record this year at Dune Fest and UTV takeover. I'm getting some upgrades with the car, getting my shocks tuned, make sure the bump stops land right. Because my RS1 has bump stops, so it's a whole experiment. Because it's made for jumping. So yeah, I got the Dune Fest, UTV takeover, and then I got some hidden stumps coming up, hopefully of this year. But yeah, those are pretty much my two main Huck Fest jumps that I'll be competing of, and then I also got some races coming up.
Well, that's what's crazy. Like now, the bar has been set so far for a lot of these UTV jump cons. It used to be you just take a stock, stock razor, Can-Am, whatever, and just send it, and and everything's all right. But now you guys are going so high, so far, you have to have a purpose-built car, not just for the suspension to handle it and the safety if something goes wrong. I mean, there's some consequences jumping as far and high as you guys are now.
So yeah, like when I jumped my bone stock car, like I twisted my frame, bent my shocks, buckled my arms. Like these are the safety precautions you have to take. So after that jump, we're going full blown jump car. So I took my Desert RS1, tore down a frame, bought a turbo motor, bought a bunch of stuff, added the bump stops that AK Fab built me, and I built a full purpose jump car. It has HCR suspension, King shocks, King bump stops, and it's a tricked out car. The shock points are all different. There's nothing stock on the car. It's got a pure turbo on it, so it's got a pretty nice turbo on it. It's got a fuel pump, so these are like purpose built jump cars. Like I said, like I can't just go take it out in short course, or else if I come out of the corner, it'll just wheel it.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the deal. You have to have a purpose built jump car.
Yeah. So I know Vegas to Reno coming up. That's in the plans for you. That's a long one. You gonna solo that? You tag teaming it with somebody?
No, I'm soloing it this year.
Nice. I've soloed it before. It's definitely, you got to get your mind right to go and solo a race that long, and it's like
Oh
I
yeah.
tell people, I'm like, it's not just it's easy to have, somebody split driving now. Usually, generally, my brother and I will split driving down the middle, and I'll do like the first 300 and he'll do the last 200. But it's like, man, I mean, you just like there's a mental prep you got to do to go and drive 12, 14 hours in a UTV.
Right. So when I did it, when I split it with Alexia Leeming, she was, I believe, 13 and I was 12, or she was 14 and I was 12. And so we both split it. We both did, she did 200 miles. I did like 275 or something like that. It's definitely a mental challenge. So I started the first 200 miles of race. There's silt, there's dust, there's rocks, there's a little bit of everything. And the last 50 miles are pretty brutal. And
Oh, it's gnarly.
especially because that had just rained. So we were going through puddles, we were going through, and then there's that steep downhill that you go to the finish, and you're going through trees, and there's cliffs all around you, and it's scary. Especially doing it at how young it was. Like it was definitely a fear of mine. Like the fear of falling off one of those cliffs was scary. So it's definitely like one of those things you gotta really do and not really think about. So it's a scary race. You definitely have to prepare yourself for that one. Make sure the car is 100% prepped because it's a long race. It's like 489 miles or something like that. So it's a long, long race. So the car starts off perfect, and then as you end the race, the car's ready to fall apart. So it's a long race.
That's what I tell everybody. I'm like, Vegas to Reno, the worst part, the roughest, worst part of the race, the last 50 miles. I'm like, you've survived that long. And then it's like, oh, yeah, we're really going to make it tough on you to finish this one. It's like
Yeah,
that mountain, you know what I mean? And just the rocks and everything else, that last 50 miles, it's gnarly. It's like,
it
all
is. It's
like,
super gnarly.
and generally by the time we get there, it's at night, so you're doing it all in the dark.
Exactly. So especially because we had started last year's or 2 years ago's Vegas Trino at 4 p.m. We'd started at 4 p.m. because unfortunately one of the people had passed away right before we started. So we were sitting at the starting line waiting for like 3 hours until we could finally take off. So I believe we finished at like 3:45 a.m. So and we were all stupid tired. The pit crew was tired. It's a gnarly race.
See, and I think I had went off, and then that happened behind me. And I remember because they were like, we got to one of the pits. They're like, oh, the race is paused. I'm like, so we need to stop. They're like, no, no, no. They're just delaying everybody behind you. And I was like, we ended up finishing at like 10:30, 10:45. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
you
no,
guys had been hella late.
oh yeah, it was super late, especially because we had to race the majority of it in the dark. And especially dust in the dark doesn't really mix that well.
No.
So we're doing like 60 in the how do I say it? 60 in the desert and with dust in our face, and I couldn't see anything. He's like, it looks clear, just keep going. And we're in the dark and it's full dust and I couldn't see anything. So the dust and the dark doesn't really mix. So for the people that got to take off early and race half the race in the light was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. Like people see these big rigid light bars, everything else. I'm like, they're great when it's clean air at night. But I'm
Oh
like,
yeah,
when it's dusty, I'm like, the top bar comes off and you just run off the bumper lights because
right,
all
pretty
it
much.
is like a blinding wall, like right in front of you, and you can't see anything.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So man, so what else you got? Obviously, got some jumps this year. I know we've got UKTV takeovers. You got a Vegas Torino. I'm sure we're going to see you out at Sand Sports Show too.
Yeah, I'll be at all those. I normally do like little demos at Sandsport Super Show on my RS1. So if I'm able to, I normally do donuts in that car. But like you gotta brake check it, gas it, brake check it, and then go into the donut, or else it like the front tires will come up. So if you watch some of my old videos of the RS1 doing donuts, my front tire comes up all the way, almost like a SST truck, and it'll come up the whole time when I do donuts. So for like corner, the tire comes up. It's a sketchy car to drive, but yeah, that's normally what I bring to Sand Sports. But
Yeah,
yeah, I got Vegas Torino. If Silver State is going to happen this year, I'll be doing that. And I might even start going into some of the legacy stuff.
yeah, I know they've got. I did Baja Nevada 2 years ago when they did the stage race. Last year it was like one continuous race, but the stage race where you get like you do 300 miles, you get to prep your car overnight, and you go back and do
Nice.
300 miles. Dude, it was awesome. We had so much fun. We just barbecued in the parking lot, wrenched on the car, and we had an all new car for day number 2. It was so awesome.
So that's one of the cool things about King of Hammers, because I'll be there for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the race even starts, because then we got a lot of time to pre-run, and that's one of the cool things. Because with desert, it's kind of like you show up the day of, then you get the car tech the next day race. King of Hammers, you had like a week, like you would qualify, you got like 3 days, and then you got the race. So that was one of the super cool things. It was almost like qualify the next day, prep the car next day, like go out the next day race, which is one of the cool things about hammers as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, buddy, it's been awesome having you on the show, man. Looking forward to hanging out with you at one of the upcoming events. I'm trying to think what's next for me. I think I'll actually be, at the HCR side by side adventure rally up there in San
Oh, sweet.
Hollow, mid May or something like that. So, you end up making it out to that one, hit me up, man.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good. I will do that.
So, all right, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, you. You too, man.